The rand still trading a little bit lower than those levels we hit back on Monday, but we saw quite a big sell-off in commodities and equities yesterday, so hitting 6.75 against the dollar, it doesn't look too bad.
Morning, Stephen. Yes, the rand actually lost a bit of ground yesterday, related, as you mentioned, to the fact that there's a weakening in commodity prices and then a sell-off in global equity markets. There could also have been an element of some profit taking, because as you mentioned, the rand has strengthened significantly below 6.70 late last week and early this week. So as long as we have this situation of global risk aversion, may have been related to the downbeat assessment that the IMF gave of global growth this year, but while global risk aversion remains slightly elevated, the rand would appear to have a bit of a weakening bias.
How about the IMF's forecast for South Africa itself? Do you think that also weighed on the rand? Because the IMF is saying that it only expects growth of around 3.5% this year.
And certainly that could have played into investors' perceptions, Stephen. The assessment that the IMF gave was that the South African economy is still weak, and they had advised that they wouldn't expect the Reserve Bank to start to raise interest rates this year at least. And that's at odds with most private sector economists who in fact have been stepping up their forecast. They have been moving forward the date at which they believe the Reserve Bank would start to increase interest rates in light of the inflationary pressures that we're seeing. So the IMF's forecast was quite at odds with the general mood, I think, on South African markets, and that could certainly have played into investors' perceptions of South Africa's potential growth rate for this year.
We also had the euro proving to be quite resilient yesterday, so not buying to any of that sell-off. And the rand trading at 9.76 against the euro from 9.50, so quite a big movement in the rand euro yesterday.
Yes, absolutely, Stephen. As you mentioned, it weakened quite a bit against the euro, and the euro is rallying a bit. We think that that's on the back of just some residual feeling over the ECB's rate hike, which is helping to prop up the euro at the moment, also being helped by expectations that the ECB didn't go for a once-off hike and that they may follow this up with additional interest rate hikes as the year progresses. So at the moment, the euro is managing to maintain its stronger bias, particularly against other fundamentally weak currencies like the dollar. But in the medium term, we'd still expect to see the euro pull back as the debt crisis hasn't been resolved, and that could certainly become a bigger feature as far as the second half of this year goes.
Now, there's no key data out of South Africa today. I know globally we have US advanced retail sales, and you're looking for a bit of a retraction in those retail sales between February and March.
Well, I'd term it more of a slight moderation, Stephen. I mean, the retail sales for February were quite strong, up 1% in the month, and consensus forecast have penciled in moderation to about half a percent, 0.5% in March, which would still represent quite robust growth. And looking at the labor market statistics out of the US, it does appear that there is a bit of stabilization, some improvement in the US labor market, which should have fed into consumer confidence, and that should be reflected in positive US retail sales today.
We also have US corporate earnings continuing today and the Fed's beige book being released this evening. So would those be the main risk factors for the currency market on the immediate horizon?
They certainly would, Stephen, although I would expect the effects of the beige book survey to only be reflected in tomorrow's currency movements, because it'll be out about 8 o'clock our time, so that should play into tomorrow's movements. But certainly those would be the key risk factors for the rand. Of course, if we have better than expected retail sales and better than expected corporate earnings out of the US, then one would expect to see a bit of a bounce in the dollar, and the rand may then weaken on the back of that strength.